according to this chart, what is the biggest driver of inflation during the pandemic? The dark blue is the recent period.
So Katie Porter has absolutely demolished the arguments of right-wing pundits.
It would be corporate profits.
And what is that percentage?
It is 54%, and that number does stay that level of high if you update that number to more recent numbers as well.
So over half of the increased prices people are paying are coming from increases in corporate profits.
Yes, the unit price index is reflected in corporate profits as opposed to other costs.
And how does that compare to historically, to other periods of inflation or over other periods of economic time?
As reflected there and in other analysis, it is significantly higher in this recovery, 11.5%.
And what is it today?
53%.
So I want to make sure everyone in America understands this chart. What is a unit labor cost?
The cost, wages and associated work costs.
So we could just wages. What is a non-labor input cost?
A variety of things, including maintenance and investments.
Okay, so I have to buy the stuff to make the widget. I have to have a factory. I have to keep the lights on. I have to hire someone to make the widget. That's this stuff. And this is what I add on top.
So in this clip, Katie Porter makes the excellent point that is the very simple fact that all of the inflation we're seeing right now is actually, for the most part, just price gouging. It turns out that corporate profits have been increasing precipitously even as prices are increasing, and it turns out that they are actually one of the main drivers behind the price increases. It turns out that they're using a combination of coronavirus and the war in Ukraine as an excuse to jack up prices. And the thing about capitalism is they always assume that whenever they increase prices, that everybody will just sort of adjust to those prices. And so they never really bring those prices back down. And so whenever there's some sort of massive public excuse for giant companies to increase the prices on things, that's exactly what they do. And it's even easier for them to do it now than it has been for the past 40 or 50 years, because the US has been undergoing this very long-term process of monopolization and consolidation of the economy. Not only are giant companies merging at a ridiculous rate, but also it turns out that people who are individually wealthy don't just invest in one company. They don't even just invest in one sector. They tend to invest in a lot of different companies in a lot of different sectors at the same time. And so a lot of the key major investors in all of these companies realize that by cooperating, or at very least by refusing to engage in price wars against each other, these companies can effectively gouge the general public with very little opposition, especially considering the fact that it seems very, very clear that both federal and state governments have little interest in actually doing anything to prevent this extreme price gouging. The unfortunate reality is that all of the Republicans and most of the Democrats are fully on board with this corporate lobbyist system where giant corporations spend huge amounts of money to get their favored candidates elected, which is why it's very rare to have people like Keith Ellison actually do things like use the Attorney General's office to try and challenge price gouging instances. But there's another political reality to this as well. And that is the fact that giant corporations know that they will fundamentally make more money under more extreme right-wing administrations. In fact, this is one of the leading pushes towards fascism, as it was in Italy and Germany, is actually business interests who want to fully and completely demolish the power of labor union and working class power. And unfortunately, it seems like that is what we are doing here. And so I would say that this price gouging serves more than just an economic purpose for these millionaires and billionaires. I would argue to say that it actually serves a political purpose for them as well. That part of their attack strategy against more left-wing candidates is by artificially stagnating the economy and artificially inflating inflation, with the sole purpose of using it as a measure of attack against more left-wing representatives and giving an opportunity for the extreme right to campaign on the economy, claiming that somehow it's right-wing politicians that would fix things, when in reality, the fact of the matter is, not only would they break them more, but it is actually these giant corporations that are intentionally breaking things. And this is actually something that giant corporations did during Franklin Delano Roosevelt's presidency. When FDR was trying to pass the New Deal, giant corporations actually went out of their way to try and suppress growth to make it seem like his New Deal policies weren't working. And the unfortunate reality is the Joe Biden administration is not pushing as hard or for as radical of measures to actually fix our economy. Which is why, instead of leaning on fear and embracing reactionary politics, we should actually be going the complete opposite direction and supporting more radical leftist positions where we're actually more willing to take democratic control over the economy so that it actually serves the interests of working class people, which fundamentally means increasing corporate tax rates, and substantially so, while at the same time relieving some of the tax burden that is put on working class people. Because the reality is, in the United States, it used to be that almost all of the taxes were paid by corporations, and very little of it was paid individually through individual income tax. But corporations have been hard at work since the Reagan administration to shift all the burden away from corporations and onto individuals. So in order to really get out of this mess, we need to directly challenge corporate power. We need to put very high taxes on the extremely wealthy and giant corporations. And we also need to give working class people a break. And not only tax breaks for working class people, but also things like debt relief and economic subsidies and support so that people can afford basic necessities like housing, healthcare, food, etc.